This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Benjamin Belcher, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 485 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Joseph Reiser. He's the Harriet S. Wiswell and George C. Wiswell Professor of American Constitutional Law at Colby College, and is the author of the book Jean-Jacques Rosseau, A Friend of Virtue from Cornell University Press. He also taught me most of what I know about constitutional law and political theory. And we'll be speaking with him today about Aldous Huxley's classic novel Brave New World. And this will involve spoilers for everything in the book, so just be aware of that. And now here's our interview with Joseph Reiser. All right, so we're here with Joseph Reiser. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Glad to be here.
Okay, so first of all, how big of a science fiction fan were you growing up?
I was actually a pretty big science fiction fan. I read a lot of like Asimov and Heinlein. Got a hold of Dune when I was about 12, maybe, and read that. And I won't say I altogether understood it the first time I read it, but I was entranced. I loved it. I found everything I could actually by Frank Herbert and just tore through his novels and short stories. And there were some really weird things in there. And let's see. So that was, and of course I had a sort of sideline in fantasy. I was a big Tolkien nerd as well.
What are some of the weirdest things in Frank Herbert? I've only read Dune by him, so.
Well, let's see. So there was this. It's a story, novella, Hellstrom's Hive, where there's a kind of bee colony-like group of, I guess they're people-ish, and they must be Homo sapiens, and they kind of are spreading. And of course, I believe are eponymous. This is a long time ago that I read it, I may have the story wrong. But I think our hero is a kind of detective trying to figure out what's going on. And, he finds out too late by being assimilated or some such thing. But it's the messing around with biology, that it was controlling people through pheromones and, there was a sex scene that was probably shocking and titillating to the 15-year-old version of me. And there was another one, might be the Dosadi experiment, if I remember this right, that there's a planet where they're basically confined to the planet by some kind of force field or some such thing that you can't get into outer space. And there's a reason. It's some kind of weird test of some kind. That they're trying to breed this species to. I don't know. They have to become mean enough to break out or something. I don't remember. But anyway, just interesting, odd ideas. Another one where they build an AI that then demands to be worshipped.
That sounds really cool. And so you said you were like 15 or so when you were reading those, and then did you keep reading science fiction into college and grad school and so on?
On and off. Actually, I went through a period of I don't know, when I was about 16 or 17, I discovered Dostoevsky, and so I went hard into the Russian novels for a while, and I did read Kim Stanley Robinson, the Mars trilogy at some point, in graduate school or shortly after, not long after they came out, I think. Recently, I've been reading a fair amount of science fiction just after work. I guess Dostoevsky is a little heavy to be reading at night. So, although on the other hand, some of the recent stuff, I mean, the three body problem, and its sequels were very dark.
Yeah.
Very dark indeed.
I mean, I thought you might be a science fiction fan because I just have this really vivid memory when I took your intro to political theory class, where you said you were looking for a babysitter. You said that you and your wife had not been out of the house in like 2 years or something, but you said you wanted to go see the new Star Trek movie, so you were looking for a babysitter.
Fair enough. Yeah, that I was a big Star Trek fan. I was a kid during the 70s, and so the original series was on pretty much constant rotation on syndicated TV, back in the day when there were three channels and maybe one thing on UHF. And so I just watched the original series over and over. And I think I had paperback books, novel or story versions of the plots. So I must have read those obsessively. I was kind of late and the Next Generation started when I was in college, and in those days when we didn't have a TV set in our room and didn't really start watching it, probably until graduate school. Picked it up midway through and then tried to work my way back. The first couple of seasons I really didn't like that much.
Did you ever have this sense of Star Trek as this kind of left-wing future?
It's interesting. When I was a kid, it didn't feel as left-wing. I mean, it really just felt, even as a kid, I knew it was progressive and, oh, look, it's still the Cold War going on and there's a Russian on the bridge, and it's interracial. And what struck me and what I still actually like about it is the optimism of the vision. I just found that so appealing. And this sort of mediating balance among, if you think of Kirk as kind of courage or spiritedness, and Spock as reason or intelligence, and McCoy is basically, heart or friendship or some such thing, that all three of them turn out to be necessary. And, you find them, there are at least a few original series episodes where they come upon an apparently perfect but stagnant society, right? That or maybe both limits on intellectual inquiry and on whatever, assertiveness, exploration, daring. And the Enterprise folks bring it down.
Well, and speaking of stagnant societies, in that same class, actually, the intro to political theory class, one of the books that you assigned was Brave New Worlds. And I was just curious, could you talk about why you wanted to assign sort of this dystopian science fiction novel in a political theory class?
So there are a couple of reasons, and I wish I could claim that this idea was original with me, but actually I got the inspiration from the first political theory class I took as an undergraduate, which would have been in the fall of 1985. And the professor at that time assigned an intro to political theory class that began with Plato and ended with Brave New World. And, I thought he made a lot of the connections for us then that I think I try to bring out when I teach it in my class. Sort of structurally, there are a couple of reasons why I think it fits well. One is it does, I think it does connect very naturally back to the sort of core debate in 171, Intro to Political Theory, that I set up kind of between this Aristotelian vision of life dedicated to excellence and virtue and a kind of, Hobbesian world of desire satisfaction oriented around basically peace, peace, stability, order. And, the Brave New World is of course perfectly, or designed to be, intended to be perfectly static, kind of the fulfillment in a way of everything Hobbes wants, I think. And of course the Savage has this, Aristotelianism, for lack of a better word, right? This longing for virtue. It's a kind of Christian longing for virtue, or Christian-ish, mediated by Shakespeare. But so it's useful for that purpose. And then one shouldn't underestimate the importance of having a light, easy reading at the end of a long semester right before people take exams.
Well, so I was looking at the Colby website, and it looks like there's a class that you're involved with or a course called IS 149A, Utopia and Dystopia. And it looks like there's 3 different classes that are all kind of related. But the works that are mentioned in those 3 descriptions are The Republic by Plato, Utopia by Thomas More, The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, A Modern Utopia by H.G. Wells, 1984 by George Orwell, We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and then The Joke by Milan Kundera. So is that a pretty good list of sort of the most important dystopian political theory kind of works?
Well, they're a set that fit really well together. There's certainly a bunch of others that one could have chosen. Yeah, the integrated study, just to kind of clarify, it's a little program we have at Colby that creates kind of super freshman seminars out of 2, or in my case, 3 linked courses. So there's one taught by me, which is the political theory piece. There's a literature and freshman writing composition course taught by a colleague, Milan Babik. And then there's a kind of history of utopia course taught by another colleague named Jesse Meredith. And so the same 15 students take all 3 courses. So it's, I'm not teaching that's being taught in the literature class, but I get to refer to it. I mean, they're just on Thursday, we sort of compared the first city in the Republic. It's a kind of city based on the satisfaction of material needs, right? Which Glaucon will reject because he thinks it's fit for pigs. But it's got this sort of bucolic harmony to it, and so I compared that to the Garden of Eden, which then I brought in sort of Rousseau's account of the fall from the Discourse on Inequality, and Kant's account of the expulsion or the fall from, why am I forgetting the pompous name of the thing? Conjectural Inquiry into the Beginnings of History, or some such title. And even in there's a moment where one of D503's poet friend R13 is, there the juxtaposition is, right? In the garden, they were unfree but happy. Why did they choose freedom? And then all of human history was then a search for unfreedom and happiness. And so this is sort of the story that one state is telling about itself.
So have you been teaching Brave New Worlds every year for the last 20 years, or do you kind of switch it up? Or
I won't say every year, but most of the time. I think there were a couple of iterations where I dropped it out, but it's just it's worked so well. It's something you can get students to talk about. They're likely actually to read it in that early December time when people's minds are turning toward final exams and completing final projects. So yeah, I've taught it a lot.
So do you have your thoughts about it changed at all after talking about it over such a long period of time?
That's an interesting question. I'm afraid I'm going to sound shallow if I say they haven't changed much, but maybe I see more, more connections or different connections. But the basic contour of the thing, I think, is pretty straightforward. That is the Brave New World, presents itself as the world in which you're going to achieve stability because, nobody's ever going to want anything they can't get, and anything they ever want, they're always going to get. Now, obviously, the solution to that well, at least the Brave New World solution to that is just to condition people so that they only want the sorts of things that they can be easily given. And the cost of that, and, I just love that confrontation at the end between the world controller, Mustafa Mann, and Helmholtz, and then after he walks out, it continues with John. And, I think the case for the Brave New World is put pretty well there, okay? Yeah, stability means the sacrifice of the noble. It means the sacrifice of yearning. But if the alternative is a, catastrophic war of annihilation, like, this looks pretty good.
Yeah, let me just, in case anyone listening to this hasn't actually read the book, let me just set up sort of the basic ideas were 500 years or so in the future in London, and the society, all the children are born are sort of decanted in these vats and are sort of engineered to be of different castes, from the top, the alphas, to the bottom, the epsilons. And the alphas have ordinary human intelligence or maybe enhanced human intelligence, and then the lower castes are designed to be less intelligent so they can do more menial jobs and not get bored. And there's lots of everyone's encouraged to have as much sex with everyone else as they want or can have from an early age. And there's lots of there's this drug called soma, which is this sort of recreational drug with no hangover, so you can just kind of take as much of it as you want. And yeah, and the whole society is just built around sort of indulging, doing work and indulging in childish, thoughtless pleasures. Is that a pretty good summary?
Yeah, and everyone is designed, and educated and conditioned. I guess conditioning is a key word in the novel. Sort of habituated, but sort of hypnotized and brainwashed, basically, to want to do what they're obliged to do by their social role. So that, if you think about it, we're all trying to figure out, in our world, well, gosh, where do I fit in? What job should I have? Am I really doing the thing that I'm potentially best at, or did I miss out somehow? Should I have gone to med school 20 years ago? Like, I have a child who's a couple years out of college, right? She's trying to figure out, well, what does she do? In the Brave New World, that's not a problem. You just, you're genetically engineered from birth and conditioned so robustly that the only thing you want to do is the one thing you're best suited for. And so you fit right in.
Right. And another, I guess, big aspect of the plot is that there are these reservations where the society, there are these areas that are just not worth them developing. And so then the people are kind of living in, sort of hunter-gatherer type societies. And so there's a character, Linda, who had gone to one of these reservations and got left behind. And so she's been stuck in this reservation for the last 20 years or whatever. And she's raised this child, John, and she remembers the Brave New World society as this, like, basically paradise. Like, she loved everything about it, and has just told him how great it is. And so it's just interesting, that it's this dystopian novel, but to a lot of the people in the society, this is a very appealing place to live.
Well, that's right. And, the impression, the story is told more or less following Bernard Marx, who's a kind of misfit in the Brave New World. And he's weirdly trying to impress Lenina Crown, I guess, by taking her to the Savage Reservation. And that's where they meet John and Linda, and they bring them back to London, which, then for a brief time makes Bernard a celebrity. And, in due course, of course, there's a conflict that, I guess, spoiler alert, right? When Linda dies, John kind of snaps, and his disgust at the Brave New World, is unleashed. And so he decides he's going to liberate I think they're Delta caste, maybe just Gamma caste workers at the Hospice for the Dying, by throwing away their soma, their drug, rations. And, be men, be free, he shouts to them. And so a riot ensues, and you've got to love the Brave New World. They break up the riot by foaming everyone with kind of, soma gas, and I think they have anesthetic water pistols so people fall asleep. And then there's like the big booming voice of their hypnotic instruction telling them, I think urging them to start an orgy. I think it actually ends with an orgy, this riot. And then that's what brings John and Bernard's friend Helmholtz into their conversation with the world controller. So one of the things that you asked, what about my opinion changed over time? One thing that I guess I didn't fully appreciate early on is kind of what a basically bad guy Bernard Marx really is. On the one hand, you're set up to kind of like him because, well, after all, he's revolted by the aspects of the, this hedonistic, consumeristic, sex-obsessed society that I think we're kind of supposed to be repulsed by, but at the same time, he's irascible. He's very insecure. He lashes out when his vanity is wounded. When he returns with John in tow and becomes a celebrity, then he becomes a kind of horrible social climber who, now that he sort of fits into the Brave New World because people are giving him the kind of respect he craves, he acts shabbily to his friends. And so there's all of that I guess over time I noticed more and more, and it maybe became a little difficult to take as I reread the book.
No, it's funny how Bernard has this complete reversal from being so obsessed about the injustice of the society when he's on the bottom to not caring about that at all when he's on the top. It reminds me, I don't know if it's still there. When I was at Colby, there was a cartoon up in the hallway of the government offices where there are these three fish. There's a tiny fish, a medium-sized fish, and a big fish. And the medium-sized fish is about to eat the tiny fish, and the big fish is about to eat the medium-sized fish. And the tiny fish is thinking there's no justice in the world. The medium-sized fish is thinking there's some justice in the world. And the big fish is thinking the world is just. And, that really captures that, how shallow Bernard's, philosophical commitments are. It just depends so much on how he's personally being treated.
No, absolutely. And I think about that cartoon all the time, but I don't think it made the move with us from the library over to the Diamond Building.
Yeah. Well, you should get another one. I like that.
Get another one. It's a classic. I do think about it a lot.
Yeah. But so, and I agree with you that I was really taken by this part where Mustafa Mond, the world controller for Western Europe or something, he gives this defense of the Brave New World society, where he basically says, that, it used to be okay to let people be people, but modern technological society is so fragile and it would be so catastrophic if the whole thing breaks down that's sort of a luxury we can't, the sort of normal humanity is a luxury we can't afford anymore. And everyone has to, play their part in keeping this machine going because it'll be, millions will starve if these factories stop making food and stuff like that. Is there anything about his argument that you're like, yeah, I can kind of agree with that?
It's certainly attractively put. The thing that really strikes me when I think about Brave New World is, how much of the apparatus of the Brave New World we're kind of willingly putting into place ourselves, like not as a matter of central government control necessarily, but of sort of decentralized things we're choosing on our own. So that's the aspect of it that I fear more. Would I, living in the world of that timeline, kind of agree with the world controller? I want to be more optimistic than that. I really do want to believe that, and maybe it's this, right, that there would have to be some kind of maybe continuous growth model, expansion beyond the planet, that would stop us all from killing one another here because we care so desperately about whether Odessa belongs to, Russia or whether it belongs to an independent Ukraine. Like maybe there comes a point in our development where we don't have to fight about those things as much because there's somewhere else to go and new things to do and so many new places to go and things to do that, we're not fighting over who controls this port or this little waterway. But, I don't know. I think you stumped me a little bit.
Well, no, and certainly as a science fiction fan, I can totally endorse the idea of, if we could get off of Earth and expand elsewhere, that would be really great. But you were saying there are aspects of this world that you feel like we're putting into practice just on our own, even without a central authority pushing them. Like, what are some of the ways that you see Brave New World kind of coming true around us?
Well, I mean, the choice for quick pleasure over, over excellence, right? I mean, there's this the scene, which, in some sense is a comic scene, but it encapsulates a lot of what the novel's about. The woman who had gone out to the Savage Reservation, Lenina, we're supposed to believe is young and beautiful and all the ways that nice, healthy 26th century or whatever it is Londoners are supposed to be. And John is, of course, smitten with her. John somehow has kind of old-fashioned ideas about saving himself for marriage and, earning the love of a good woman. And he wants to sacrifice and prove that he's worthy of her love by achieving something, and wants to wait because the waiting will make the love and the marriage mean something. And so, although she's flirted with him, he hasn't made the first move, right? And so Lenina's sensible friend Fanny says, well, just, wear something sexy, take a little soma, and head on over to the apartment and take matters into your own hands. And so she does, and, she disrobes and basically says, take me now. And he doesn't, right? He says, shouts at her, impudent strumpet. She runs in terror into the bathroom. And you teach that, and you look around a classroom, right? Okay, gentlemen, like, how many boys in this room are not going to just take her down? And the number is very small.
I mean, that's interesting because, certainly there's a lot of ways in which this book, which was written in 1932, it seems to prefigure a lot of the sexual revolution and the hookup culture and stuff. But I sort of, and I'm not, it's been a long time since I was in college, but I don't know. But what I've read is that there's actually been sort of a, sort of like an increase in like anxiety around sex and approaching people and things like that. I read something where it was saying that something like 50% of men between the ages of 18 and 25 have not had sex in the past year. And that there's actually been this big, that the amount of sort of free love kind of, sort of peaked and plateaued and has actually started to dip quite considerably. I don't know if that's,
I've read that too. I haven't, I certainly don't take polls of my students and what they're up to. But it doesn't seem to me it's accompanied by a revival of a kind of, ethos of romance and lifelong love. It does seem to be maybe a byproduct of the, availability of internet porn, which is, ubiquitous basically. People seem to be attending to their own needs, and I don't know, it's so hard to tell. And I do think, young people today are anxious in so many more ways than certainly they were 35 years ago when I was in college.
Yeah. It's definitely not because of a resurgence of chastity or anything like that. I think it is. You're right. It's all sort of about the technology and and people being raised to just to sort of be more insular and, online and in their phones. And, and also like I think the dating apps have made it, have created sort of this more free market for sex, which has benefited, I think it's like has really benefited sort of the top 20% of men in terms of attractiveness, and sort of leaves the bottom 50% or something completely out in the cold. And it seems like that's something that, that the Brave New World, it kind of like projected forward accurately, for 70 years or something, but that we've kind of like gone a little bit past. Some of these technologies are having these sort of second order effects that this novel wasn't quite anticipating.
Well, right. And, interestingly, I mean, I guess from the point of view of maybe the people left out in that kind of market, Brave New World would be a superior alternative, since it's really, I mean, there is a deep egalitarianism, with respect to all the pleasures. Everybody belongs to everybody else, they say. And, it's kind of expected that you'll sleep around, right? That actually it's your social duty, right? And you think of what the sort of parody religious service, there's like basically 12 people that seem to be chosen, by lottery. And then, they have this manufactured moment of sort of intensity that merges quickly into an orgy. And, the whole point of it is that it's a group celebration, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think that sort of the ethos in the book of everybody belongs to everybody, is definitely more of a sort of Marxist thing. And, you mentioned like the character, obviously Bernard Marx is named after Karl Marx, and Lenin is named after Lenin. And a lot of the characters are named after these sort of, Marxist figures. And I think that sort of, that sort of left wing ideology certainly has a certain appeal among young people today, but nowhere near to the extent that this book would sort of, predict, that it seems to me anyway.
No, but I guess the hard thing for me, is the way the book sets it up, basically. There's the Brave New World Society, which is decided to remake people so that, they never want what they can't get. They always get what they want. So desire satisfaction, if that's your model of happiness, right? If happiness is getting what you want over and over again, then that's perfectly achieved. And, the sort of another way to think of that society is it's always choosing against pain, right? There's really nothing worth suffering for. I mean, I guess some suffering is inflicted as part of the early childhood conditioning, but is it, the adult society should be a kind of smooth ride of pleasure after pleasure. The Savage Reservation sort of, there's some reflections in the preface by Huxley in the paperback edition I have, where he wanted the two alternatives, he said at the time, to be kind of madness and insanity. And the Savage Reservation, it's really, the central ritual you see there is a kind of who can endure the most pain the longest, essentially for the good of the community. And, so that you really have, okay, there's if these are your choices, just the embrace of pain for the sake of the embrace of pain. And, let's just sacrifice everything for kind of, impulse satisfying pleasure. Between those two options, pleasure is going to win every time. And, telling the story of struggle, of excellence, of virtue, of self-sacrifice, of all those things, I think that's just a hard sell.
I mean, obviously, I know that you're very interested in Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and
yes.
It's been a while since I took your class, but I mean, the way I remember it is that he had these ideas about, the state of nature and kind of the, to some extent, at least the desirability of the way people are formed morally in a state of nature and things like that. And do you see the sort of savage reservation in this novel at all through the lens of Rousseau?
I think it's an interesting question, Dave, but I kind of think not really. I mean, because the reservation is still here, got a weird mixture of kind of remnants of sort of the lost pre-Brave New World civilization, right? So there's like a crucifix and an eagle and an American flag, I think, are the things they're like all venerating, and it's Jesus and a kind of native god. And so there's a flotsam of culture to it. And, whereas Rousseau's thought basically seems to be that what he's really trying to illustrate by imagining a kind of harmonious, and it's not a perfectly, but mostly harmonious state of nature, is he's really trying to illustrate the mismatch between a lot of our instincts, or at least the way our instincts typically manifest themselves in a kind of competitive hierarchical society, and what would produce harmony. If you think of, like, we evolved to be hunter-gatherers, and some instincts that might have served us well in those circumstances, when mediated through the structures of civilization, or maybe that's maybe the problem, right? And he's trying to figure out, well, Rousseau is trying to figure out, how do you restructure society? How do you cultivate character, to bring about the harmonious development of both, and the harmonious good development of both. I mean, I'd like to think, would be horrified by the Brave New World.
Mm-hmm. I actually, because one of the reasons I ask is because I had picked up a copy of your book, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, A Friend of Virtue, and I just read a couple chapters of it last night. And I don't know if I remember this, or if I knew this, but that he actually thought that fiction could be used to provide a moral, to make people virtuous, essentially.
Well, that's my somewhat eccentric claim about it, but I think it accounts for why he wrote 2 novels. And it was not just to sell books. I mean, I think both of them, well, and in that age, there was no real copyright protection, and he didn't know how to, or refused to sort of play whatever games he would have had to play to really make money off his books. So he ended up dying poor, though the novel that no one reads today anymore, really, it's called Julie, or The New Heloise. It sold some enormous number of copies. I think the number of, editions, authentic and mostly counterfeit, was like 60 between, its initial publication date and whatever it is, 1762, I think. And, in like 1804. I mean, people loved it at the time. But now it's kind of heavy-handedly sentimental.
But the sort of the idea, as you explained it, as I got, was basically he thought that the way to inculcate virtue in people was if they had a friend, like somebody that they knew and trusted, who could serve as an example for them and sort of a tutor for them. But there was basically nobody in the real world who was, or people like that were so rare in the real world that people were unlikely to ever encounter them. But if you created a fictional character like that, then people could read the book and be made virtuous. And that he included the virtuous character in these books is Rousseau. He sort of includes himself as this model citizen, and then people criticized him, saying, you're not really like this. And he's like, well, no, but it's fiction. I can make it up.
I mean, I think that, certainly that's a good summary of my argument there. And I think, well, look, how do you become a better you, right? I mean, it helps to see, to have an example before your eyes of someone who does the right thing pretty consistently, and as a way to help you with moral training wheels. And I think, I guess you get a sense of Rousseau's impression of the state of organized religion in his day, when, essentially he's undertaking this project in a way because he thinks the churches aren't really doing it. There is the famous central section in his Emile where, and it sort of an odd point in the novel where Rousseau sort of drops even more explicitly into autobiography, and he describes, modified, but his encounter with a very unorthodox Catholic priest from Savoy, who instructs him essentially in a kind of natural religion, and goes on to tell him, a number of things about religion that probably seem that many liberal Christians today would accept, but that in the second half of the 18th century got Rousseau condemned by both Catholic and Protestant authorities. This priest basically tells the young Rousseau, who had grown up a Protestant in Geneva, well, nobody really believes any religion other than the one they were brought up in, and God doesn't care that much about the difference between Catholics and Protestants, so you should go home and be a good Protestant. And even though maybe God doesn't particularly care about all the very little details of the things the ritual I go through when I celebrate the Mass, this is what I undertook to do, and I'm going to undertake to do it as reverently as possible because, God cares about our, essentially our willingness to follow him, and maybe God doesn't sweat the details. And to many people at the time, that actually was, a liberating and encouraging message, but obviously it got him in deep trouble. The Archbishop of Paris condemned the book, ordered his arrest. He flees the country. He can't really go to Geneva either because they condemned the book. And worst of all, maybe his atheist friends were outraged that he had said anything nice at all about religion, and so he was really in a tough spot there.
But so is what you're saying that you think that the principle is sound of having a novel that makes people virtuous, and Rousseau was just too didactic in the way he went about it, or you think that wouldn't really work anyway?
At the risk of sounding like a total dork, there's a lot in Emile that I actually do find even personally inspiring. That I do think, look, I think it's a much better way to learn how to become an excellent person, to have like a real close human relationship with somebody who's altogether admirable and excellent, and one can, pattern oneself after them and grow in strength of character and, moral vision, basically. Rousseau's thought was that, I think most people are not in that situation, or at least that was his perception. And, I think still, even today, for many people, reading the Bible or something has that effect, that they read the parables of Jesus and they think, that has that effect for them. And, I don't want to sound like I'm equating the two, but, there are people, the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, right? And the folks who watch his videos or listen to his podcasts or read his books and think, oh, this is unlocking for me the secret of what it means to be excellent. So I think, I think people need somehow to be, there are moral heroes and saints who kind of figure these things out for themselves. But I think for most of us who are not moral heroes and saints, it really helps to have guides of some kind. And I think we can find them in a lot of places. Rousseau thought the affective story quality of novels was much more effective than writing, didactic philosophy treatises. And I think he's right about that.
Well, I mean, I've talked a lot on the show about how inspired I was as a kid by the 8 Virtues in the Ultima series of computer role-playing games. So I'm not going to be throwing stones at anyone else being too dorky for where they find their inspiration from.
I never played those games.
Yeah, they were. You should check them out. I mean, they were sort of popular, kind of in the mid '80s to mid '90s, sort of. But yeah, in Ultima 4, the premise is that there are these 8 virtues, honesty, spirituality, honor, sacrifice, etc. And you need to go around and prove yourself in each of the 8 virtues in order to win the game. So it's this really kind of interesting, unique sort of game.
Wow. Yeah, I should check it out. The one I remember is one of the campaigns in, I think, the expansion of Warcraft 3, where you have this kind of anti-hero narrative.
Okay, I played Warcraft 2, but I didn't play Warcraft 3, so can't comment on that.
Yeah, you become gradually more evil until, you finish the human level and emerge, fully on the side of the undead.
That sounds really cool. I did also want to ask you about, there was a quote, let's see if I can find it. This is the director is talking to the students. I guess this is near the beginning of the book. But he says, "Fortunate boys, no pains have been spared to make your lives emotionally easy, to preserve you, as far as that is possible, from having emotions at all." And just that thing about, our top goal is to make your lives emotionally easy kind of reminds me of the stuff that people say these days about safe spaces and trigger warnings on college campuses, and that students are being sheltered from challenging ideas rather than being encouraged to engage with them. And I was just curious if that's anything that you've encountered or have any thoughts on.
Right. I mean, there's an interesting connection there. I mean, certainly, within the confines of the novel, they're not supposed to have any sort of longings, right? Unsatisfied, mooning after some, unattainable, romantic interest. And they're not supposed to be, longing for that job that they're never quite going to get because they aren't quite good enough, because they're going to be perfectly designed for the one job they're going to get, and that will be great. So I don't worry about it too much. I'm teaching political theory. It's about, war and state building, and all done in the shadow of genocide and, the possible extinction of the human species. People should kind of know what they're doing when they're studying politics. And I think there's some recent study that just came out suggesting that trigger warnings have no real effect, on student anxiety or anything like that. I sort of try to think of those things through the lens of student politics, and I wonder how much of that is really, kind of, this is the way the students can actually wield power over their professors by, we're so afraid of seeming to be insensitive that that's the lever point that students can use to kind of organize and issue demands that we'll comply with. And it's not, I don't think, really about anything. I mean, I think that, the make us feel safe and comfortable is, I don't know that that's either the actual, I know it's what's said, but I don't think it's the underlying motivating energy or the actual effect. I don't know, maybe that sounds too cynical to say it's all just kind of a weird power game and the centuries-long struggle between rebellious students and, weak teachers, but it's kind of what I think it is.
That's interesting, because I saw also that you, a year or two ago, you were on this panel about the importance of a free press in a democracy. Yeah. Do you feel like there is I don't know, I didn't see this, the panel, so I don't know, but I assume you took the position, the pro free speech position, or you're concerned about free speech, or?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, am a pretty close to free speech absolutist. And, I mean, part of it is that anything I see being censored by somebody, I assume is more, that I usually regard that as a reason to have some, well, maybe I should look again at that idea because somebody's really afraid of it. And, it's just so, offensive to adults to say, you can't hear this or you can't hear that. And I think politically it's just deeply corrosive. I think it's much better to let people talk. If they stop talking, the next thing is to start, it's violence basically. So I think for all kinds of reasons, free speech is important. And, on a college campus, getting folks to, like when you're 20, you're still super self-conscious. And I mean, certainly that's how I remember, my teen years and 20s. And, everybody wants to be accepted and to fit in. And there is a kind of, I don't even think it's a large group, but there's a kind of loud, censorious, progressive set of students who really can't abide having their pieties challenged at all. And they can make life difficult for people who would even want to talk about alternative perspectives, let alone actually embrace them. And I think that has to be just resisted at all costs. And there are a variety of devices for kind of introducing, sort of requiring people, even if it's just, okay, as a matter of role play, you're going to imagine yourself who, is part of the, dissent in Roe versus Wade, and you're role play that argument for us. And sure, you don't believe it, blah, 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 but just, imagine what it would be like to think that as a way of getting people to broaden the, the Overton window, right? That space of arguments you could talk about.
Well, I mean, certainly my experience was that, I'm very secular and very liberal, and I always found talking to you the most, in case it's not clear, a conservative Christian. I always found talking to you the most interesting, and it would just seem to me that going to, studying political theory at the college level and only ever talking or only ever hearing the thoughts of secular liberals, if that's what you are, it just strikes me as a complete waste of time. And, it just seems like you want to talk to people who have different perspectives as much as you can. It seems like that's the whole point of an education.
Well, I mean, it was kind of you to say that. I certainly agree. And the way I try to teach the history of political thought is really, as much as possible to sympathetically get into the heads of the people I'm teaching. I have a harder time with some than with others, but, it's important that, and obviously the dialogue is, the range of arguments and ideas is much, much broader than, left versus right or some, whatever we're fighting about today in American politics. It's, should we have absolutism? What kind of elite should rule? How do you organize a democracy? Which rights should be protected? There's so many, and even those only scratch the surface. And that's why, to get back to using novels to teach political theory, I think you said on one of the other podcasts, episodes of yours that I listened to, that science fiction enables us to kind of try out, in literature, very different sets of social arrangements and kind of look at how they are and, through the medium of story, maybe even get beyond that kind of reflexive, it's different, it must be bad. And really to sort of play out in our heads, well, could this work? What would that mean if we change this thing? What happens to these other things? I think fiction does that really well. I think speculative fiction does that really well. And, that's part of why I love teaching books like Brave New World or We. Wells is a little bit, preachy. But but still, he has his charms. So.
Well, yeah, and I thought that's one of the things that Brave New World did really well was, like there's these things that we just take for granted are good, like being a mother or living with your family. And the people in the society see those things as, taboo or embarrassing or gross or undesirable. Like there's this part about just like, oh, can you believe people used to live in like little houses with their families, and those are the only people they saw all day, and the mom was popping out kids, and it's just and the kids are all horrified by this idea. And it's just, I always think it's so interesting when you can, take the things that we like the most or that are the most sacred to us, and show how they could seem completely different from a different point of view, from someone from a different hypothetical culture.
Right. And it's probably not by accident that that's introduced so early in the novel, right? That mother is their ultimate swear word.
So we're running a little short on time. Is there anything else about Brave New Worlds that you think we should touch on before we go? Any other thoughts you had on it?
Sure. I mean, there are two things, I guess. So one is, even though I guess I don't altogether agree with the World Controller's defense of Brave New World, he is in some way embodies all the virtues that nobody else in Brave New World is really allowed to cultivate. That is to say, he had been a scientist, right? That's how they select their World Controllers. The cleverest scientists who, in the pure pursuit of knowledge, go beyond the bounds of the kind of working out the details of how to improve the industrial and, medical processes of the Brave New World. Somebody who finds actual new truths, they're a threat. And so you then say, okay, here's the story. You're either gonna sacrifice your highest good for the sake of preserving the society, right? Or actually you can go, they'll send you to an island, where you can hang out with other disaffected scientists. And, in Plato's Republic, the third sort of wave of paradox there in book 5 is that this city that they're talking about bringing into being through this conversation is going to be ruled by philosopher kings and queens. And the philosopher kings and queens, one of the things about, the choice of philosopher king as the ruler is that, Socrates argues that you should want as a ruler somebody who would rather be doing something else, right? Because somebody who would rather be doing something else is not ruling, to satisfy some ego desire to be applauded or to have people stand up and listen to Hail to the Chief when you walk in the room, and somebody who has something intrinsic that they care about, isn't going to want the money and isn't going to be right. And so this is what philosophers would rather be pursuing knowledge. And in some sense, the ultimate choice of virtue there in the Republic is like, yeah. And then they willingly let that go to rule their fellow citizens, to actually, to benefit them, right? That at some level, the good is in some sense, this altruistic choice, to serve others. And weirdly, that's actually Mon, in Brave New World. And he even says, right, the happiness of others is a hard master, but that's my duty. And so sort of the one admirable guy in the Brave New World, or maybe there's 10 world controllers, I guess, so maybe there's more. And there's even like this, he quotes Jesus at one point early on, right, when he interrupts the tour of the baby factory at the beginning, and little kids start climbing all over him, and the director of the factory shoos them away, and he says, right, suffer the little children, which is something Jesus says. And that you could almost think of this, right, embrace of self-sacrifice for the good of others as having this kind of, that's the Christ story as well. So anyway, I just think that's a remarkable feature of the novel.
Yeah, and it's a pretty common idea too in dystopian fiction, this idea that the people running this society secretly enjoy the things that they prohibit everyone else to have. Like you see that in this, you see that in Fahrenheit 451. You see that in Handmaid's Tale. I mean, it's it's kind of interesting how often that idea pops up.
Well, and it's there in 1984 too, except, I think you get the sense that when O'Brien is eating the chocolate, real chocolate or having real coffee, like in a weird sort of way, he's tasting the sorrow of the inner party. That the point of it for him is the sort of sadistic, boot on face for forever. Whereas Mond, is kind of wistful. Like, well, if they read Othello, they couldn't understand it and it would unsettle them. And, it might be nice if they could have real art, but, the price would be too high. I don't know. It's more, it's not like he's enjoying the deprivation of others. That is the vibe I get in say 1984. Anyway.
It's also funny what you were saying about Plato, this idea that the people who want to rule should not be allowed to do it. Right. I don't know if you've read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but Douglas Adams sort of has fun with that in this galactic civilization in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They have the same idea. And so they're like, okay, we're going to find the person who's most apathetic in the whole galaxy. And that's the person we're going to have make all the decisions. And it turns out that it's this complete radical skeptic who doesn't believe anything is real and pretty much picks things completely arbitrarily. And so, the reason I guess one reason the whole galaxy is so dysfunctional is because this is the person making all the decisions ultimately.
I did read all those books, but a long time ago. I just remember Zaphod Beeblebrox as the big party animal, but is that?
Well, yeah, but he's the president, but
he is the president. He is an idiot, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't realize that he's not actually making any important decisions. He's just sort of a figurehead. But he's so busy partying and everything that it never occurs to him, like, wait, I'm not actually making any important decisions. It's all part of the satire of the book. All right, cool. So we should probably start wrapping this up pretty soon. Do you have any, any other final thoughts? I guess, do you have another book about Rousseau you're working on or anything like that?
I do. I don't have a contract yet, so I can't tell people where to get it. But I'm working on a book, arguing, if the first book is mainly about Rousseau's discourse on inequality and Emile, this project is mostly about the social contract, but also draws on other of Rousseau's kind of more narrowly political writings, and with some of his engagements, even in the politics of Geneva. He got involved in a kind of pamphlet fight in the 1760s. And so there's a work actually now available in English called The Letters Written from the Mountain, that anyway is part of this whole political spat that arises in the wake of the banning of Rousseau's books and the warrant for his arrest that was issued. And so the argument there is basically that, the contractarianism, in the social contract is actually, I don't know how to put this. I think it's a really good argument. I think, if we understand what Rousseau actually is talking about by the general will, he's basically, right to think of membership in political societies as constituted by something like our embrace of the social contract, or the terms of the contract as he lays them out. And, looking at sort of what he demands of a legitimate government, I actually think there's a lot, when you look at modern constitutional and democratic states, we're actually much more Rousseauian than we think we are. I mean, there's a kind of very vividly obvious contrast that is, he's kind of envisioning a little city-state, right? Sort of something better than Geneva, but on that scale, and obviously those aspects of his thought we've had to repudiate or chosen to repudiate, whatever. We're not going to that scale, but still in this society of equal citizens with at least aspirationally equal basic rights, universal suffrage, representative government. In a lot of ways, we're actually living up to those principles. So that's what I'm working on now. I'm really, I could say more, but it wouldn't be about Brave New World anymore.
Well, that's good. I hope you get a contract soon, so I can read that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I hope to finish it soon.
And I guess maybe the last thing, you mentioned to me over email that you're teaching The Dispossessed now in one of your utopian classes. So I guess just, is there anything you want to say about like what's going on this semester in terms of dystopian, utopian, science fiction stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, so this semester, I'm teaching. My part of this utopia cluster involves the Republic and More's Utopia, which, you sort of have to do, but nobody super enjoys. Marx, of course, Marx thought he wasn't a utopian, right? He was a scientific socialist, and Engels has a famous essay, outlining why they're scientific and not utopian. And, we assigned that, but still this sort of optimistic faith that if you abolished private property, everything would work out kind of itself does seem sort of utopian. I assigned right after Marx The Dispossessed because that society on Anaris, so this is the novel by Ursula Le Guin. There are these planet and its moon. It's somewhat ambiguous which is the planet and which is the moon. The sort of anarchist communists live on one of the barren moons, and they have a technologically, it's mostly, their society is mostly simple. They import high technology items from the other planet. But it's the one imagining of a society without property that seems reasonably plausible to me. And, we see it in its more attractive light, and we also see criticisms of it, both internal, right? The sort of ways in which the Anaresti society fails to live up to its own ideas. And then, we get this marvelous contrast when the anarchist scientist goes down to the other planet, Eurus, which is kind of an Earth-like planet, and he's in a kind of, spends all of his time there, I guess, in the consumeristic America-ish, society of commerce and inequality and money and property and wealth. And he's just viscerally repulsed. And we learn a little bit of the other society on that world. I think it's called Thu, and it's a sort of USSR type state socialism, which sort of everybody agrees is kind of horrible. So anyway, I love that novel. And I think, the central insight there, that idea that the revolution has to live in your heart, that the society to make that society without property work. I mean, even apart from the organizational challenges, requires a kind of moral transformation that's not easy to accomplish, but when it can be accomplished, at least under certain circumstances, it brings some pretty great spiritual rewards.
Yeah. What you were saying about Marx there reminded me of on our foundation panel, we were wondering if Karl Marx was the person, aside maybe from literal religious prophets in history, who was most confident in his ability to predict the future. And at least among the people on the panel, we couldn't really come up with anyone else who we thought had more confidence in his ability to accurately predict the course of future events.
Yeah, nobody's coming to mind. I mean, and what's fascinating, though, is that he really, he's really sure that getting rid of property is going to solve our problems, because property is so clearly the root of all our problems. And yet it gets so vague very quickly as to what happens precisely after, so the state will abolish private property. Okay, so then what happens?
Yeah, it's like the underpants gnomes kind of. I don't know if you know that thing.
Yeah,
But,
that
like,
happens.
It's like, yeah, like abolish property, something, 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 utopia. And then the stuff in the middle is a little vague there.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So this has been great. So let's wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Joseph Reiser. And again, he is the Harriet S. Wiswell and George C. Wiswell Professor of American Constitutional Law at Colby College. So, Joe, thank you so much for joining us.
Dave, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Joseph Reisert for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.